Tonight we begin with the long-forgotten world of ancient Mesopotamia, with the real unsung figures of temple life. The women who were labelled sacred. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Let's begin where all questionable destinies start, with your parents, whose love is so boundless they just gave you to a fertility cult. It's 2300 BCE, you're 10. Your biggest concern used to be whether your clay doll had enough beads. Now your mother's buttering you up with phrases like, Inanna has chosen you, which sounds suspiciously like, you've been volunteered for something you didn't sign up for. And no, there's no opt-out form, just a long stare from your dad and a suspicious lack of eye contact. Because in Mesopotamia, if your family couldn't afford a proper dowry, or you had the audacity to be born after your older sister, you were gently escorted into divine service. Like a subscription, except you don't get a trial period, and the cancellation policy is death by blasphemy. The Temple of Inanna accepts all major sacrifices: livestock, grain, and unwanted daughters. Once you're in, you're renamed, redressed, and repurposed. Like upcycling, but emotionally scarring. Your initiation includes fasting, chanting, and probably bathing in sacred river water that hasn't been filtered since the Euphrates got bored. You'll be handed a ceremonial linen wrap, told it's a blessing, and then assigned to sleep in a room that smells like burnt frankincense and other people's regrets. Your parents go home proud. They think they just secured themselves divine favour. Meanwhile, you're trying to figure out if you're allowed to cry during blessed silence hours. Spoiler, you're not. The temple priests are cheerful in that cult leader sort of way. Hollow eyes, tight smiles, and an unsettling obsession with ritual nudity. They welcome you with phrases like, your body is the goddess's temple, which you will come to understand is ancient code for say goodbye to personal boundaries. And let's not forget your new title, Pr0stitute, a sacred devotee of the goddess. Sounds elegant, right? Until you realize it means you now represent divine femininity via awkward public acts of fertility while the elders take notes. You haven't even hit puberty yet, and somehow you're already spiritually married to a goddess who likes blood, wine, and drama. Welcome to sacred womanhood, where every honor feels like a trap, and the mat you sleep on is probably older than your grandfather's beard. And this is only the first day. When someone says the word temple, you probably imagine serene incense, calming chants, and maybe a wise priest humming softly while a bowl of fruit glows in the sunlight. Yeah. No. The Temple of Inanna was less wellness retreat and more chaotic theocratic HR office, with added sex magic and livestock. You step inside expecting divine peace, and are instead greeted by a goat relieving itself near a ceremonial statue. The walls are covered in cuneiform that nobody has translated for 400 years. The floors are sticky with spilled beer offerings, and the only scent in the air is burnt goat with top notes of desperation. As a new recruit, you assumed you'd be trained by elegant high priestesses in flowing robes. Instead, you get barked at by a wrinkled woman named Ninlil, who smells like garlic and disappointment. She hands you a broom and says, "The goddess loves a clean floor," which is Mesopotamian for your sacred training begins with janitorial duties. The rooms are a maze, not in a holy labyrinth kind of way, but in a, we've added 12 extensions to this building since 2000 BCE and no one drew a floor plan kind of way. One hall leads to the sacred archive, another to the ritual performance space, and one definitely just ends at a pit. You are told not to ask about the pit. There are no plush cushions, no massages, no fountains gurgling with rosewater. The only flowing water is from the sacrificial basin, which hasn't been properly scrubbed since the reign of Sargon the Great. You're assigned a mat on the floor next to 3 other girls. Privacy is a myth here, along with fair compensation and boundaries. Meals consist of lentils, flatbread, and the constant reminder that you're doing this for Inanna, even if you're really just doing it because your parents needed a tax write-off. When night falls, you lie awake listening to the sounds of distant drums, drunken chants, and what you hope is a sheep and not a priest rehearsing the fertility rites alone. This temple doesn't restore your spirit. It grinds it into clay, stamps it with a god's name, and files it under assets. But don't worry, the spa day is coming. It's just probably going to involve you being the exfoliated item. You are promised a sacred role, a divine calling, a spiritual vocation of the highest order. What you were not promised? A schedule that starts before sunrise, ends after moonrise, includes 0 bathroom breaks, and features you pretending to be a living symbol of divine fertility, while old men chant around you and spill date wine on your sandals. Let's be clear. The temple did not hand you a pamphlet. No scroll, no orientation video, no friendly priestess with a clipboard explaining workplace boundaries. You learned your duties the old-fashioned way, through vague metaphors and passive-aggressive hymns. At first, they tell you that your body is a vessel of the goddess. Sounds nice, right? Until you realize that being a divine vessel is less chalice of wisdom and more community-use goblet with questionable cleaning protocols. Your training includes walking in perfect circles, chanting while balancing a jug on your head, and practicing sacred gestures that make you look like you're attempting to signal passing boats. None of this is explained. You're just told to move like Inanna, which is profoundly unhelpful when no one actually agrees on how Inanna moved. Then there's the ceremonial dancing. You are not a trained dancer. You are a teenager with chronic foot blisters and the rhythm of a startled donkey. But the priests nod solemnly and call it beautiful, which is Mesopotamian for good enough for the goddess, and also the drunk merchant watching. And now, the elephant in the ziggurat, the sacred sexual rites. No one told you what they actually involved. You thought it was metaphorical, a symbolic honouring of fertility, a poetic reenactment of myths. But no. It turns out you're the starring role in a live-action fertility drama with actual men from the community who have paid actual barley. Barley. Not silver. Not gold. Barley. Your first reaction is, surely this is optional. It is not. The gods, apparently, are very pro-barley-based economics. If you try to protest, you're told you don't understand the divine will. If you ask questions, you get reassigned to cleaning the sacred goat stalls, which are not metaphorical. You slowly realize this whole sacred role is just a job nobody wanted to write down. Probably because if anyone did write it down, future historians might get suspicious. If you thought your temple duties couldn't get more uncomfortable after barley-based mating interviews, buckle up. It's time for the rituals. Now, in theory, these ceremonies are meant to reconnect humanity with the divine. In practice, they're elaborate public performances where your main job is to look mysterious while swaying to rhythms that sound suspiciously like someone banging pots in the next room. Let's start with the outfits. Each ritual has its own specific wardrobe, all of which fall under the category designed by someone who has never worn clothes. There's the feathered diadem of Inanna, which itches like a curse, the sheer veil that offers zero warmth or modesty, and the ceremonial belt that's really just a rope with delusions of grandeur. You're told to wear these with grace while balancing a platter of sacred dates and pretending your feet aren't screaming. Meanwhile, a priest wearing 20 pounds of beads and an expression of cosmic constipation reads poetry to the goddess. It's all very moving, especially when you realize the poem is just a veiled complaint about grain taxes. During the fertility rite of spring, things get particularly dicey. The temple floor is covered in flower petals, which sounds poetic until you slip on a damp one and nearly reintroduce gravity to your jawline. You're meant to perform a slow, sensual circle around a sacred plinth while humming a tune that's never been written down and never will be, because it's improvised, and you're not a bard, you're a barley salaried body double. You've also been trained in symbolic movements, like the gesture of the blooming womb, which looks suspiciously like a shrug, a bow, and a cramp at the same time. The audience is a mix of worshippers, drunks, and a handful of scribes taking notes way too enthusiastically. Then comes the offering segment. You kneel, hold up your bowl of lentils, and chant the divine words. Except one time, you sneeze mid-offering and accidentally bless the wrong god. For a week, everything smells like fish, and the high priest glares at you like you personally insulted the ziggurat's plumbing. But remember, it's all sacred. Every humiliating misstep, every mispronounced chant, every goat that wanders into the ritual space mid-procession, it's all part of the divine mystery. Especially the goat. He's a regular. Let's set the scene. The temple is hot. Not tropical beach hot. More like bake-a-date pastry on your own thigh. Hot. Add in 50 people, 3 goats, burning incense, and a sacrificial fire pit that nobody remembers to ventilate. And you have a scent profile best described as eau de ancien armpit. As a temple prostitute, your official title might be Nadatu, Kadishtu, or another name that sounds impressive in Sumerian. But your hygiene routine? Roughly equivalent to that of a damp pot left under a ziggurat. Bathing is technically part of your sacred duties. In practice, though, it involves a cracked ceramic basin, half a jug of lukewarm river water, and a scrub sponge that might also double as a ritual object, no one's sure. Soap exists, sort of, but it's made from ash and lard and smells like something you'd offer a demon to make it go away. The elite priestesses, of course, get real baths, courtyards with drainage systems, fresh oils, rose petals. They get perfumed towels and assistants with soft hands. You? You get a broken clay jar and a judgmental goose watching the whole process from a corner. Hair care? There's oil, but it's shared among 12 women and a scribe who insists it prevents baldness. You comb your hair with a stick, twist it into something vaguely ceremonial, and hope the gods don't notice the lice. Spoiler, they do. That's why there's a whole hymn about divine itching. Clothing is washed once every lunar cycle, or whenever someone spills wine on it, whichever comes first. You own 2 ceremonial tunics, one for rituals and one for pretending you're not in a constant state of existential rash. And let's not even talk about oral hygiene. The best case scenario is a rinse with beer, which sounds fun until you realise the beer is flat, warm, and more bread than liquid. There are no toothbrushes, just twigs. And prayers. Lots of prayers. The worst part? Every time a merchant shows up with crushed myrrh, the high priest buys it for sacred anointing. And somehow you're never the one getting anointed. You're just the one handing out towels. Let's talk about clients. Not worshippers, not pilgrims, not noble devotees moved by the divine mysteries of Inanna. No, these are regular mortal men. Sometimes very mortal, often very regular. Your first time waiting for a ritual partner, you imagined a well-oiled soldier poet, someone tragic and handsome, someone who'd quote hymns and weep softly under the stars, someone who, perhaps, smelled like cedar and danger. What you got was a sweaty grain merchant named Nabu with a limp and a nervous rash. He brought you 3 handfuls of barley and a half-eaten fig as tribute. You tried not to cry, mostly because that would be considered a bad omen, and you did not want to trigger another cleansing ritual. The men who show up at the temple aren't heroes. They're not even side characters. They're townsfolk with untrimmed fingernails and opinions about ox carts. They talk too much. They breathe loudly. and they all believe they are somehow blessed to be part of your divine service, even though they smell like fermented onions and haven't washed their tunics since the last lunar eclipse. You learn quickly how to spot the bad ones, the ones who ask too many questions, or not enough. The ones who believe they're gods now too, because they paid the fee. The ones who bring friends and ask if there's a group rate. There isn't, but you suspect the priests are considering it. Worst of all, the romantics. The ones who mistake your forced smile for affection, who leave you tokens, a cracked bead, a poem carved into a stick, a lock of their hair, unrequested. These men want love. You want out. Some are kind, some are awkward, some are just deeply confused about where the exit is, but none of them are Odysseus. Not even close. And yet, each encounter is billed as sacred. You're told to bless them afterward, sometimes while holding back laughter, sometimes while holding back bile, but hey, at least they usually bring barley. Usually. If you thought your job had no room for micromanagement, think again. Welcome to the temple, where the high priest has all the charisma of a tax auditor and the subtlety of a donkey in heat. And yes, he's watching you. Always. Now, theoretically, he's here to oversee ritual purity. In practice, he's perched behind a beaded curtain like some Mesopotamian version of a reality show host crossed with a suspicious uncle. His eyes never blink. His sandals squeak ominously. And every time you try to relax, he clears his throat like it's an ancient curse. He's the one who assigned you this sacred duty. He's also the one who decides whether you performed your rite with proper reverence, a vague phrase that seems to mean whatever he wants it to mean that week. One day, it's about posture. The next, he's critiquing your tone. The day after that, it's because your left hand looked ungrateful. He takes notes during rituals, not on a tablet, on a scroll. A scroll, which means he has to lick the tip of his reed pen every time he writes. And yes, you can hear it. Every single time. Sometimes he offers feedback, unsolicited of course. You should smile more during the offerings of the sacred oil. Try humming lower during the hymn of fruitfulness. Stop flinching when the goat approaches, as if you haven't spent the past week dodging that same goat's horns. And just when you think he's left the temple for the day, there he is, behind a pillar, casually munching on pomegranate seeds like this is peak entertainment. Is it surveillance? Is it ritual obligation? Or is he just really, really nosy? Either way, you learn to work with the constant presence of priestly judgment. You smile your tightest smile, you recite your lines perfectly, and you never, ever sneeze during the incense lighting. Not unless you want a lecture on the sanctity of nasal discipline. At the end of the day you wonder, who watches the watcher? Answer, the goat. And honestly, the goat's less judgy. You'd think that, as a temple prostitute, a sacred servant of Inanna, you'd get a little divine protection from mortal drama. Alas, you're not just a living symbol of love and fertility. You're also a convenient scapegoat for every wife in the city who suspects her husband is up to something fishy. And guess what? He is. And that fishy thing is you. It starts subtly, glares from across the ziggurat steps, whispers when you walk past the barley stalls, the occasional accidental bump with a water jug. These women don't care that you're not technically allowed to marry, or that your clients are chosen by the priesthood. All they know is that their husbands keep coming home with that post-temple glow and a little too much incense in their beards. Soon enough, they form a club. Unofficial, of course, but terrifyingly organized. The Jealous Wives Club meets by the communal ovens and specializes in long stares, passive-aggressive gossip, and the strategic misplacement of your ceremonial sandals. Some will curse you under their breath. Others get creative. One carved a tiny figurine of you with a cracked foot and buried it under a dung heap. Another sent her daughter to learn the sacred rites just so she could spy on your laundry. You try not to take it personally. After all, you're just doing your job. It's not your fault the gods insist on a system that involves sensual ritual cleansing and barley offerings in dim lighting. But try explaining that to a woman who hasn't been looked at fondly since the last solstice. You once tried to befriend one of them, offered her a sweet date and a kind word. She bit into the date, looked you dead in the eye and said, "Tastes like my husband's breath." You now avoid eye contact for safety reasons. The irony? Most of the temple wives used to be in your shoes. Literally. Many were former sacred workers themselves, back when their knees didn't creak and their husbands still brought wine instead of excuses. They know the life, and maybe that's why they resent you so much. After all, they remember exactly how miserable it was. Let's talk about money, or rather the stunning absence of it. Being a temple prostitute, holy servant of the divine union, sounds like the kind of job that should come with perks. At the very least, a steady stream of silver shekels and a corner seat at the festival of new grain. But alas, while the priesthood rakes in tribute after tribute, you are paid in vibes. Well, technically, you're paid in barley, dates, and the occasional goat. But don't get excited. These are symbolic offerings, and they don't go to you. They go to the temple treasury, which is managed by a priest whose idea of wealth redistribution is occasionally letting you lick the honey bowl after he's done with it. You do get meals, thin lentil stew and hard bread, and a mat to sleep on. If you're lucky, someone tosses you a linen scrap that used to be part of a nobleman's tunic, now repurposed as your ritual wrap. Fashion forward? No. Technically alive? Barely. You once dared to ask about actual wages. The high priest gave a long, winding speech about divine compensation and how Inanna blesses you in ways no coin ever could. Then he walked away, jingling a pouch of silver that definitely wasn't metaphorical. Some temple sisters try to save up by moonlighting, weaving, brewing, reading omens in goat livers for bored merchants. But if the priests find out, you get demoted to candle wicker scraper, which is exactly what it sounds like, and smells even worse. So you keep performing your sacred tasks with a plastered-on smile and a stomach that's made peace with occasional fasting. And when your sandal breaks, you just wrap it in twine and hope the goddess appreciates rustic humility. Some girls fantasize about escaping the temple and marrying rich, but let's face it, any man wealthy enough to support you probably already visited the temple, and if he didn't marry you before seeing you chant naked under moonlight, he's probably not planning to afterward. But don't worry. The gods see your sacrifice. They just don't reimburse it. If there's one thing that sums up the contradiction of your sacred career, it's this. You're not allowed to marry. That's right. You can anoint a merchant with sacred oils under a full moon. You can whisper hymns into the ear of a travelling soldier while he still smells like camel. But you may not, under any circumstances, develop an exclusive emotional connection or, heavens forbid, put on a wedding veil. This isn't just a temple rule, it's divine policy. According to the scribes and priests who definitely don't have a personal stake in this arrangement, your body belongs to the goddess. Inanna, they say, has loaned you to the mortal world for rituals of fertility and spiritual communion. You are a living altar, and altars, as we all know, do not get married and raise goats in the suburbs, which is ironic, considering you perform enough marriage rites that you could officiate a dozen weddings by now. But when it comes to actually building a life with someone, no thanks. That might involve happiness, and we can't have that. Now, some girls do fall in love. Secretly, of course, usually with a guard or a junior priest, but the minute things get serious, the temple steps in with all the grace of a hammer on wet clay. Your lover is reassigned to a distant province, and you're given extra moon vigils to help you reflect on your inappropriate attachments. The punishment for breaking the celibacy clause? You don't get stoned. That would be merciful. Instead, they keep you longer. They extend your sacred service. You get to be a senior guide to the younger temple women, which is just a fancy way of saying you supervise the incense closet and pretend not to hear them cry. So no marriage, no partnership, no cozy domestic future with a fig tree and 3 half-naked toddlers chasing chickens. Just the warm, eternal embrace of ritual duty and a goat who keeps chewing your robe. But hey, at least you're spiritually fulfilled, right? When you first arrived at the temple, fresh-faced, nervous, and still smelling vaguely of sheep, you may have harbored the faint, foolish hope that you had some say in what happened to your body. That hope was promptly incinerated in the sacred fire. As a temple prostitute, your body is no longer yours. It belongs to the temple, or to the goddess, or to the priests, or to the men offering goats, grain, or suspiciously damp silver coins. The exact chain of ownership is a bit murky, but one thing is crystal clear. You are not at the top of it. The priests refer to you as a vessel, which sounds poetic until you realize they mean it quite literally. A container, preferably empty, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's easier that way. Less fuss when a nobleman wants to honor Inanna with you on the 3rd day of the moon, or when a visiting official needs a ritual blessing before signing off on barley tariffs. There's a ceremony for everything, and you are the centerpiece. Did you think you'd have a say in any of it? Oh no, sweet summer initiate. Your job is to smile serenely, undress artfully, and pretend this is all a deeply spiritual moment and not an awkward appointment that's running 10 minutes behind. Sometimes, after the sacred union, you get a moment alone. You wrap yourself in linen, sit behind the incense curtain, and try to remember what it felt like to be just a girl. Not a vessel, not a symbol, not a holy receptacle. Just you. You won't remember. Not for long. Even when you're not performing rites, there are rules. Don't bathe at certain times. Don't cut your hair unless it's during the annual shearing. Don't eat certain foods. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't run. That's ungraceful. Don't laugh. That's unholy. Don't cry. That's inconvenient. It's not just your body that isn't yours. It's your time, your voice, your breath. But hey, the temple scribes did write a hymn in your honor once. It rhymed. Sort of. Let's talk festivals. You'd think they'd be a break. A celebration, maybe even a chance to wear something clean and slightly less itchy. Nope. Welcome to the Mesopotamian equivalent of a corporate holiday party, if that party involved a lot more nudity, dancing, and emotionally repressed priests chanting about barley fertility. Festival season, which, let's be honest, happens every 6 days, is when the temple really ramps things up. You, the sacred servant, are now the star of an elaborate public performance that somehow combines theatre, religion, bad choreography, and a lot of confused livestock. On the festival of Inanna's descent, for example, you're expected to reenact the goddess's mythical journey to the underworld, symbolically, which means stripping off 7 layers of clothing in public as you descend 7 temple steps. It's ancient spiritual metaphor, and also just ancient striptease. People cheer. Children are present. There's a guy selling date beer and roasted locusts like it's the Mesopotamian Super Bowl. But the real highlight is the sacred marriage rite. This is when a high-ranking priest, or occasionally the king himself, symbolically mates with you, representing Dumuzi and Inanna uniting to bless the crops. The ceremony takes place in front of everyone. There's music, incense, a lot of awkward eye contact. You are supposed to moan spiritually. Afterward, everyone feasts. You, however, go back to your mat smelling like burnt frankincense and questionable symbolism. Then comes the parade of the divine maidens, where you're herded through the streets in full ritual garb, i.e. sheer linen and regret, waving to onlookers while trying not to pass out in the sun. Elders toss flower petals. Teen boys toss comments. Some festivals involve ritual bathing, which is temple code for being scrubbed raw by a matron with delusions of cleanliness and a pumice stone from hell. Others involve long fasting periods before the big day, so you get to faint halfway through a fertility dance, which, ironically, makes the priest call you divinely fragile. That's not a compliment. It's a warning label. And no, you don't get the day off afterward. You get kitchen duty, because even divine vessels are expected to stir the lentils. You'd think life as a temple prostitute would at least earn you a little professional solidarity. After all, you and your fellow sacred companions are all bound by the same goddess, the same rituals, and the same uncomfortable linen wrap that never fits right after washing. But no, the real eternal flame in this temple is the gossip. It burns brightly, fueled by equal parts jealousy, judgment, and whatever wine the scribes forgot to lock up. Let's start with the eldest sister, who hasn't performed a rite in years, but still struts around like she invented sacred intimacy. She'll whisper to anyone within earshot that you were chosen for last week's fertility rite, not because of your aura, but because the high priest has a thing for girls with crooked toes. Meanwhile, Kibi, the wide-eyed initiate, keeps accidentally bumping into you during morning incense prep just to ask things like, "Is it true you cried during the last spring rite, in front of the merchants from Kish?" No, Kibi. It was smoke in my eyes. And yes, I hope your next divine cleansing includes extra nettles. Of course, the sacred chamber walls are very thin. You think you're having a private moment of reflection, or maybe eating that honey fig someone left as an offering. And suddenly everyone knows you snuck an extra bite. By mid-afternoon, the story will be that you seduced a merchant for his figs. By evening, the fig will have turned into a gold ring. And by moonrise, someone will be writing a hymn about it. Then there's the unofficial rankings. Who has the most devoted clients? Who got offered a silver comb? Who's been noticed by the high priest's cousin's uncle? They say comparison is the thief of joy. In the temple, it's the main event. But the real art form? Passive-aggressive blessings. May Inanna give you the stamina to keep up with all that attention. One sister smiles sweetly. May your next ritual go smoother than your last, another chimes in. Which would be touching, if she hadn't watched that ritual from behind a pillar while snickering into her prayer beads. In the temple, silence is sacred, but gossip is divine sport. In the temple, obedience isn't just expected, it's theology. You're not simply a worker with a bad job and worse linen robes. You're a divine vessel. And divine vessels don't talk back, show up late, or skip that very awkward fertility demonstration just because they were having a mild emotional breakdown. Because if you do, it's the Euphrates for you, sweetheart. The river test was Mesopotamia's favorite form of conflict resolution. Did you offend the priest? Break a sacred vase? Whisper that the god statue looks like it's judging your posture? To the river you go, to let the gods decide your guilt. Think of it as a spiritual performance review with a strong current. Here's how it works. You're escorted usually by a group of smirking elders and at least one guy with a very large stick down to the banks of the river. There you're ritually bound, because free swimming would be cheating, given a brief prayer. May the gods show mercy, or something equally vague, and tossed in like yesterday's offering. If you float or manage to swim to safety, it means the gods approve of you. You're innocent. You might even get promoted. If you sink or get eaten by a crocodile, well, guilt confirmed. Now, being a temple prostitute didn't come with many rights, but you did have the honour of being tested with extra drama. Your test might involve more elaborate blessings beforehand, which don't help, but do make your potential drowning feel festive. Occasionally they even let the clients watch, like it's some sort of divine reality show. But here's the kicker. Everyone wants to believe the gods will intervene. Even you. until you realize that the guy tying your wrists is also the guy who accused you of lacking piety after you rolled your eyes at his chant. Spoiler, the gods rarely intervened. Those who survived the river came back soaking, half dead, and now officially untouchable, which, in temple terms, meant they could sweep the courtyard but were no longer allowed near the sacred bread. Which is probably fine. You weren't eating much anyway, so you've survived decades of incense smoke, fertility rituals, river trials, and passive-aggressive prayers. Your hips creak like badly maintained ziggurats, your back's been bowed more times than a sacrificial bull, and your youthful allure now draws more sympathy than divine favour. Surely now, at the twilight of your temple career, you get to rest. Maybe sip some pomegranate wine under the shade of a fig tree and tell scandalous stories to wide-eyed initiates. Absolutely not. Welcome to retirement, Mesopotamian style. You don't get a pension. You get promoted to weaver, herbalist, or if the gods really want to laugh, full-time celibate caretaker of the sacred goats. You're now what the scribes call a nada too, a cloistered temple woman devoted to the gods and to never experiencing joy again. As a nada too, you live in a cell, and not like a cozy monk's cell with rustic vibes. This is a room with a mat, a lamp, and the lingering smell of cumin and existential dread. You're expected to weave cloth for the temple, copy sacred hymns by hand, and generally stay out of the way unless your advice is needed. Which it isn't. You don't have children. You don't have a husband. You don't even have your old lovers sending you offerings anymore. Apparently once your sacred duties expire, so does your fan base. Oh, and those younger temple girls. They now look at you like you're a living cautionary tale. Did she really serve Inanna for 40 years? Why does she mutter about fig theft in her sleep? Didn't she once bite a priest? Yes, and technically, but he deserved it. But there's one upside. You finally get a tiny taste of peace. No more awkward rituals. No more rivalries over who gets the most gold-plated amulets. And best of all, nobody expects you to smile through another fertility chant. You sit in your corner, hum ancient hymns and think, at least I'm not in the river. Because in the end, surviving is the divine reward. In ancient China, food was never just food. It was philosophy, medicine, and politics, all served on a lacquered tray. To eat was to participate in the balance of the cosmos. Every dish, whether simple millet porridge or extravagant shark fin soup, carried meaning. The guiding principle was yin and yang, opposing forces that, when balanced, kept the body healthy and the empire stable. Cold ingredients like cucumber or mung beans were thought to cool fiery temperaments, while warming foods like ginger or lamb stoked the body's inner furnace. An emperor's chef had to know not only the flavours of the kitchen, but also the theories of Chinese medicine, so that a banquet was as much a prescription as a feast, but food also screamed status. While peasants ate what was necessary, rice in the south, wheat noodles in the north, emperors and nobles flaunted rare delicacies that proved their dominion over both nature and people. Eating something exotic was a way of saying, I control the farthest mountains and seas, and I can bring them to my table. Bird's nest soup, for example, required harvesting swiftlet nests clinging to cliffs in Southeast Asia. Serving it at court was a display of wealth, patience, and sheer logistical power. The rarer the ingredient, the more divine the ruler appeared. And then there was ritual. Food wasn't only for survival or pleasure, it was for the ancestors. During festivals like Qingming, families laid out spreads of pork, fish, and rice wine before ancestral tablets, believing the spirits consumed the essence of the offerings. At the highest level, the emperor himself performed sacrifices at the Temple of Heaven, presenting whole oxen, sheep, and pigs to secure harmony between heaven and earth. To dine was to govern, to eat was to pray. So when we talk about ancient Chinese delicacies, we're not talking about snacks you grab at a street stall. We're talking about carefully engineered symbols of cosmic order, political legitimacy, and spiritual duty. In this world, a bowl of soup could mean the difference between balance and chaos, between health and sickness, even between heaven's blessing and heaven's wrath. Imagine sitting at the emperor's table in the Forbidden City. This was not dinner as you know it. This was a stage performance, a display of cosmic order, and a reminder that the Son of Heaven ate differently than everyone else on earth. A typical imperial banquet could feature more than 100 dishes, some for actual consumption, others purely for show. The idea was not that the emperor would taste everything, but that the abundance itself demonstrated power. To feed him was to feed the empire. The preparation for such a feast was a logistical marvel. The imperial kitchens employed hundreds of cooks, each with a specialized role, one for roasting meats, another for soups, another for pastries, and so on. There were even separate kitchens for different meals of the day. The staff worked under strict supervision, since feeding the emperor was as much a matter of survival as taste. One poorly cooked dish could mean dismissal, and one poisoned morsel could topple dynasties. Tasting officials were assigned to sample every plate before it reached the throne. The emperor's table was also a space for ritual. Meals began with offerings to the ancestors and to heaven itself. Certain dishes appeared only at specific times of year. Lotus root in summer for cooling, lamb in winter for warmth. Rare ingredients from distant provinces or tributary states were paraded before the court to emphasize the reach of imperial authority. A dragon's feast, so to speak, stretched from the deserts of Xinjiang to the shores of Guangdong. Then there was etiquette. To dine with the emperor required careful choreography. Officials never began eating until he lifted his chopsticks. Servants moved silently, gliding like shadows, replenishing teacups and whisking away discarded bones. Each gesture reinforced hierarchy. The emperor ate slowly, with dignity, while everyone else mirrored his pace, careful never to outshine or out-eat him. This table was also where politics happened. To be invited to share a dish was a privilege, a sign of imperial favour. A single bowl of soup could raise a man's fortune or signal his downfall. In this setting, food was not merely nourishment. It was diplomacy, medicine, ritual, and theatre rolled into one. At the emperor's table, eating was never ordinary. It was destiny, plated in porcelain. Of all the strange and treasured foods in ancient China, bird's nest soup sat at the very top of the imperial menu. It wasn't made from twigs or leaves, but from the hardened saliva of the swiftlet, a small bird that nested in caves along the coasts of Southeast Asia. To harvest these nests, workers risked their lives climbing sheer cliffs or dangling from ropes in pitch-black caverns, scraping fragile nests from the rock face. Each nest was a prize, fragile as glass and worth its weight in silver. To the Chinese court, this soup was far more than a culinary oddity. It was medicine, luxury, and divine gift combined. Doctors of traditional Chinese medicine praised it for strengthening the lungs, replenishing qi, improving digestion, and even enhancing beauty. It was believed to soothe coughs, keep skin youthful, and extend longevity. To sip from this delicate broth was to ingest not just food, but health, vitality, and prestige. No wonder emperors demanded it for banquets, and nobles hoarded it as a symbol of their superior status. The preparation itself was meticulous. Nests had to be soaked for hours to soften, then painstakingly cleaned of feathers and debris. What remained was a translucent jelly-like substance that, when simmered, produced a broth with an almost ethereal texture. Subtle, slightly sweet, but most of all, rare. Bird's nest soup wasn't meant to dazzle the tongue with bold flavours. Instead, it was prized for its purity, its aura of refinement. A dish that whispered, rather than shouted, its worth. This delicacy also carried political weight. Tributary states like those in modern-day Malaysia and Indonesia were expected to provide birds' nests as part of their offerings to the Chinese court. To present such treasures was to acknowledge the emperor's supremacy. In turn, the emperor, by serving bird's nest soup at his table, displayed the vast reach of his empire's influence. Every spoonful reinforced the idea that heaven had blessed his rule with abundance from the farthest corners of the world. Of course, the average farmer in Henan or fisherman in Fujian never even smelled bird's nest soup. This was food for emperors, concubines, and the highest mandarins. For the rest, it remained a distant legend, a dish whispered about in markets, but never tasted. So, bird's nest soup wasn't just dinner. It was a cliffside conquest, a medical prescription, a diplomatic tool, and a symbol of heaven's favour, all simmered into one porcelain bowl. When most people think of silkworms, they picture shimmering robes, not dinner plates. But in ancient China, nothing went to waste, not even the wriggling little creatures that spun silk. Once the delicate threads were harvested for weaving, the plump silkworm pupae remained behind, and the Chinese court found a way to turn them into food. To outsiders, it might sound horrifying, snacking on insects. But in China, it was practical, symbolic, and surprisingly prestigious. Silkworm pupae were considered highly nutritious. Packed with protein, fat, and essential minerals, they were seen as a concentrated source of energy. In traditional Chinese medicine, they were believed to tonify the blood, improve skin, and balance the body's inner energies. Emperors and nobles consumed them not only as a curiosity, but as a supplement, a way to fortify their strength and preserve vitality. In a culture where food was inseparable from health, silkworm pupae represented medicine wrapped in a crunchy shell. Preparation varied. Sometimes the pupae were roasted until crisp, other times boiled and seasoned with soy or spices. The texture was chewy, the flavour nutty, earthy, even slightly sweet depending on the method. It wasn't a delicacy designed to seduce with flavour alone, but with the idea that by consuming the silkworm, one absorbed the same transformative energy that turned mulberry leaves into silk. To eat a silkworm pupa was to take part in a cycle of metamorphosis, a small ritual of transformation at the table. There was also symbolism at play. Silk itself was the fabric of wealth, a material that clothed emperors, monks, and envoys from distant lands. To eat the